Welcome everyone to another episode of the FireAway series by Nala Feminist Collective. Nala is a Pan-African group of 17 feminists with a mission to really bridge the gap between policy and implementation, between generations, and between intergovernmental and grassroots spaces. In every Fire Chat, I host one of these powerful 17 women who constitute the Nala Council. And as a group, we advocate for Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, which you can find and sign at nalafem.org/sign. Today, our conversation will focus on demand 10 of the manifesto, which is on intergenerational co-leadership. And I'm so thrilled to have my sister Vanessa Nakate with me as my guest, who is a Ugandan climate activist and founder of Africa-based Rise Up movement. So to start with, Vanessa, tell us who you are in 3 words. Just 3 words.
Just 3 words. Climate justice activist.
Super. So, tell us how did it all start? We all know the story of, how we found about you on the climate conversation, but you know how it is on the media. Actually, in Africa, we have been in activism for decades, but only when there is sexy news or an event happens, that's when we find out about the people behind these movements. So your work started much, much earlier than when we found out about you.
Yeah, I remember in 2018, I started to carry out a lot of research to understand the challenges that the people in my community and my country were experiencing. And it was at that time that I got to find out that the climate crisis was one of those challenges and the greatest threat facing the lives of the people. It really surprised me because this is not something I got to know from school, and yet the impacts that I was finding out, I had actually already seen unfolding in my country, but I couldn't make the connection to, the climate crisis. And it was at that point that I decided I would start speaking up and demanding for climate justice. And being inspired by Greta, I started to do the Fridays for Future climate strikes every week. And my very first climate strike was in the first week of January 2019.
Right before a pandemic, few months before a pandemic. And then when a pandemic hit, what happened? How did you think that affected your work?
Well, before the pandemic, we would hold these climate strikes in person on the streets, in front of petrol stations, different places. But when the pandemic started, we had to really follow the health guidelines and stay at home. So most of the work was being done online. Most of the striking, you would take a picture from home and share it online. And also before the pandemic, would reach out to a number of schools to carry out climate education. We would also do the installation of solar panels and the eco-friendly stoves. But when the pandemic started, schools were closed and some of these activities were put on hold. And you find that not every student has access to a phone so that they can do activism online. So I can say that the pandemic really changed many things and how we were doing our activism, but it didn't silence the climate movement. We kept on speaking up, we kept on demanding for action in every way possible.
And do you think the pandemic somehow helped, the fight for climate justice? Because now people went on total lockdowns. People, started to do a lot of campaigning on the environment. Flights were locked and the travel has been blocked. Do you think somehow on the other, face of the coin, the pandemic showed us that we can actually do it if we really want?
Yeah, the pandemic showed that we can do, very many things. We can adapt to new ways of living, but it's not something to celebrate because with the pandemic came the death of very many people, and also, many communities and many families, struggled to find something to eat. As many people lost their jobs, as many people's businesses, collapsed. And we saw in certain countries, people were saying they rather die of the COVID than die of hunger. So it was a period that really showed, and it still is a period that is showing the weaknesses in our systems, could be health systems, and how people have really struggled in this period, especially people from the most affected areas, those who are already battling with the climate crisis. They had to battle two crises at the same time. And it's also, important to note that leaders or people shouldn't have to wait for pandemics, for the environment to become better. Like I said, with pandemics comes a lot of pain, it comes a lot of loss and a lot of death. So I think from this pandemic, we've seen that leaders can actually listen to the science and put in place lockdowns and to stop the spread of the virus. So the same way that leaders were able to listen to the science, to the advice, to the guidelines in regards to this pandemic, should be the same way they should listen to the science of the climate crisis. Because the IPCC report showed that we face a challenge of not limiting global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we need the leaders to pay as much attention to the climate crisis, like it has been showed for this pandemic.
100%. So let's talk about a young woman on the front line. I mean, it's not easy to be bold, to be speaking up, especially about an unpopular issue like climate, because everyone don't want to have responsibility, on it, and everyone, most, the leaders, whether in the corporation or in the government, are responsible for what we are suffering from right now. So being young women, being bold, taking on the cause of climate justice, what are the challenges you face? What are the anecdotes on a day-to-day basis when you sit with policymakers on the table or when you go to the community? What do you face as challenges?
Yeah, I remember in the very beginning of activism, some of the really harshest comments that I would receive on my pictures, there would be, comments of, she's looking for a man to get married. That's why she's going to the streets to protest. She's being a prostitute, or she's taking drugs. That's why she's going to the streets. And sometimes I try to think, if it was a young man doing what I was doing, I don't think they would have received that same kind of treatment. And I also received a lot of treatment, negative treatment. However much there was support, there are some really harsh comments in the time when I spoke out about being cropped out of a picture in Davos with fellow climate activists. Some people were saying I was so bossy and being so emotional. And I think many times such things are told to to women or to girls when they try to stand up against certain injustices in the community. I feel they expect us to allow those things to happen because that's how society has framed the world to be. Society has decided what women have to do and their role in society and when to speak. So when I spoke up at that time, however much there was so much support from many people across the world, there are also such comments that were saying you should know your place as a woman.
Yeah, I mean, it's we are still live in that world, even though it's 2021, and I think that's why you're fighting for justice, you're fighting for equality. What is your family and like your community reaction to your activism?
When I started, many of them didn't really understand what I was doing. But my very first climate strike, I had my siblings and my cousins join me for the climate strike. But then they couldn't join me later on because they had to really prepare for school, and my cousins also had to go back to their homes. My parents, however, didn't try to stop me. However much they didn't really get what I was doing or really understand what climate strikes were. They didn't get to stop me. But then it's really later on that I I get to know, some of the things that were, being said, especially within some family members or some friends. And it's the time when, my dad tells me, some of our relatives would, go to him and ask him, what is Vanessa doing on the streets? Why doesn't she look for a job like all the other, her friends who graduated with her? Why is she on the streets? What is she doing there? And my dad tells me these things later on, and I realized that he didn't want to stop me from what I actually wanted to do. And of course, also, I remember a friend of mine telling me that a classmate we had been at school with, his friend sent him a picture of me on the streets, and she was really laughing and mocking and thinking like I had, like, something was wrong with me. Like, why the hell was I standing on the streets with all these placards, yet all my classmates were busy looking for jobs? So it's really later on that I get to know that not everyone was really supportive, but my family was very supportive, and some of my close friends, however much they also didn't understand the climate strikes, they never really tried to stop me.
I can relate very much. I think this is the story of activists because even myself, sometimes my dad would tell me like, what are you doing, or like, what's your job title? I'm like, when I know what's my job title, I'll let you know, because I don't even know. I'm just an activist trying to, make my contribution to the world. But I think eventually they do realize it, and I think eventually they become proud of what you do, because then they see the impact of what you do. Then they see how many people are inspired about what you do. So I'm sure right now they feel really, really proud, and they see the impact of your work.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
really proud and happy.
Amazing. So you signed the Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, and you're championing the intergenerational co-leadership demand. How much you think the generational collaboration will contribute to us fastening, this fight for climate justice?
Thank you. I really believe in intergenerational co-leadership because let me say, before this movement of climate activism, I could say Fridays for Future started. It wasn't the very first, climate movement to ever be seen on this earth. There's been movements, there's been people protesting, people demanding for climate justice. So I believe that our journey to climate justice doesn't have to be a journey where everything is left to the young people or everything is left to the current activists. I think that there is so much that young activists need to learn from the older activists. And there is also a lot that the older activists need to learn from the young activists. So that is what really to me, that's what intergenerational co-leadership is: working together, understanding each other, and ready to learn from each other so that we can have climate justice. The young activists we are seeing right now, they are not a replacement for the old ones. They are not a replacement. It doesn't mean that the old ones are, they are gone now, and we don't need them anymore. We don't need their voices. We need them too, because they have been fighting, for the kind of future that we are also fighting for. So the wisdom and the knowledge from the older generation is needed in the climate, movement. And same thing with the wisdom and knowledge of the young people. We just need to find a way of that wisdom and knowledge working together, understanding each other for a future that we all want. And that is a future that is livable, a future that is sustainable, a future that is healthy for all of us. So I believe that we need
Can you hear me? I lost you for a bit.
sorry, I think that was my network.
No, no worries, no worries. But I agree with you 100%. And I think also like the elder generation have a lot of wisdom for our indigenous wisdom, like how our
Exactly.
indigenous knowledge, like how did they live before all these industrialization, and how they lived sustainably, and how they had renewable energy before we put all these fancy words on things today, saying organic and all of this. But they lived like that before, and Africa is one of the places where we really preserved our wildlife, we preserved our agriculture, we preserved, our healthy way of being. So we need to learn from them a lot. Are you doing anything around that, like documenting that, or looking into like our indigenous knowledge, or going to policymakers with these Africa solutions?
Yeah, that is something that I'm actually looking at, and I'm really happy to share something that I learned from, an older person, an older person. Again, that is why intergenerational co-leadership is important. So in my tribe, I am a Muganda by tribe, and the kingdom we come from is called Buganda Kingdom. So the names that they give us were what they call surnames. Many of the people, their names are after, you find that their names are after animals, their names are after fish, their names are after trees. And that is something I got to know later on after learning from someone, speaking that wisdom personally, I am from the Njovu clan. Njovu is an elephant. Yeah. So it means I cannot harm an elephant. It means I cannot eat an elephant. So all the people in the same clan like me cannot do anything to harm the elephant. However, you find that in the whole tribe, there are people who have their clans as elephants, some as lions, different things. So you find that different animals have different clans. And it was at that time that I learned that this is how the older people really preserved animals, by naming us after those animals. I am named after a cow. So, and even my sister is named after an elephant. So it's just these names were already connected to nature when they were given to us. At the time when we were born. And as we grew up, we got to learn about our clans, we got to learn about our totems, and we know that we cannot harm our totems or we cannot eat our totems. And that is one of the powerful ways I've seen nature or wildlife being preserved by culture.
We should do a Nala documentary about this. It's really exciting. And just go and interview all the elders in your community. That's amazing, really. And I feel like in Africa, we have a lot of those. We have a lot of our indigenous ways of preserving, our environment, our climate, and we need to hold on to that. So what's next for you? What are the future projects? You continuing with the strikes? What else you're doing now?
Yeah, of course, I'm continuing with the strikes and just organizing and protesting, basically continuing with activism and the school project of installing the solar panels and eco-friendly stoves. I'm also, looking at continuing to share this, powerful wisdom, from my culture that I also recently got to learn. And I think it's really amazing every time I think about it and also talk about it. And looking forward to the COP26, which will be in Glasgow.
Tell us about the school that you're running for renewable energy
It's not like
and
a
solar
specific,
panels.
yeah, it's not like a specific school, but it's a project of installing solar panels and eco-friendly stoves in schools. And these eco-friendly stoves, they help to reduce the amount of firewood that schools use in preparation of food, as well as the solar panels to help drive a transition to renewable energy. So far we've done installations in 13 schools, and hopefully we can cover as many schools as possible so that we can make renewable energy and these clean cooking stoves accessible to communities at no cost.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So my final question for you is, what would you advise the younger Vanessa? What would you tell her?
Well, I think it would really be to learn more about my culture and understand why I was named Nakate and why my sisters and my brothers have, specific names. For the issue of the clan, I knew that if I am of this clan, then I cannot harm that animal or cut down that tree or do something, harmful to my totem. I knew that, but actually, I had never really connected it to the wisdom of preservation. So I think I would really tell the younger Vanessa to learn more about that and to also learn more about climate issues. And yeah.
So for the young women and girls who are really inspired by you, and who are aspiring activists and who really care about, justice and all of these issues, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them as someone who had experienced a lot, good and bad, but you rised up above all these challenges and you continue to be bold and to raise your voice?
Yeah, when I started activism, I really knew exactly, what I wanted to see happening in the world. And the truth is, when I started, it was mostly to create awareness for the challenges of the people in my country, Uganda. And it was at that time that I really did a lot of studying. I didn't know much about the climate crisis. I didn't know much about global warming or greenhouse gas emissions, but it was through, reading a lot, studying different, online short courses, listening to different activists speak, and understanding the articles they're sharing. So I did a lot of, what I call personal education to really understand the broader sense of the climate crisis and what environmental activism really means. But I think, the most important thing about doing something is starting. And when you start is to just stay focused on what you really want to see happening in your community, and remember to, take care of yourself. Activism can be really tiring, so you just need moments where you have your personal self-care and just try to put activism aside and take care of yourself, because you can best take care of the planet when you are also doing well. So I would really, advise starting if you really want to start self-care when you start, and trying to connect with different activism groups in your community so that you don't have to start from scratch. And whatever action that you take, it's always important to, remember that no action is too small. Any action, regardless of how small or big it is, it's actually able to make a difference. And to also know the power of your voice when you speak up. The other thing I've also learned in activism is that there are times I've, said things and I didn't know how much they would really impact people and how many people they would reach, but I get surprised when they do. So there is really power in speaking up for what we believe in.
Your power is your radical voice. Find it and use it and amplify it. I love that. And I love what you said about you need to take care of yourself before taking care of the planet. Really, I mean, the planet is here for us to live in. But I also heard, I think, one of the climate activists who was talking about, don't worry about the planet. When we all leave and we all die, it will re-emerge again and it will flourish and it will thrive. So it's not the planet that is the issue. It's working on ourselves and really being true to our values and our way of living. So thank you so much, Vanessa Nakate, with your with your special name, for also being a NALA council member, and for championing cool leadership, for the amazing work you're doing, and for being on the front line in Africa of the climate movement. We are so proud of you. You are a light, and we're here to support you. I know it's challenging, and so many people just when they see young women rising like you, they come at. But we are here in sisterhood, and we continue to be in solidarity. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Really happy to have done this.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.